Doings of Doyle is sponsored by Belanger Books, home of the best Sherlock Holmes anthologies featuring today's top Sherlockian authors. Belanger Books is the only authorised publisher of Solar Pond's mysteries, continuing the Sherlock Holmes legacy into the 21st century. Visit them today at belangerbooks.com. Welcome to Doings of Doyle, a podcast dedicated to the works of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Professor Challenger, Brigadier Gerard, and of course, Sherlock Holmes. I'm Mark Jones.
And I'm Paul Chapman. And together we'll be exploring Doyle's eclectic bibliography to understand more about the great man's life and work. We'll be discussing his fiction and non-fiction, the well-known and the obscure.
And stopping by Baker Street along the way. You'll find out more at doingsofdoyle.com or follow us at doingsofdoyle.com on Blue Sky. Hello and welcome to episode 67. This time we take a look at one of Conan Doyle's last short stories, The End of Devil Hawker, which he completed shortly before his death in 1930. And here's Paul to set the scene.
It seems like just another night at Tom Cribb's London establishment, the Union Arms at the corner of Panton Street, in the first decade of the 19th century. The bar is crowded with aristocratic men about town, members of the boxing fraternity and all their assorted followers, hangers-on and hearty rowdies. Cribb himself, still nominally the champion of all England, is there, as is the nascent young poet Lord Byron. Amidst the uproar and chaff, the sinister figure of Sir John Hawker, Devil Hawker, holds quiet converse with Sir Charles Trevor over a debt of £3,000. They decide to settle the issue by the turn of a card, a transaction which is witnessed surreptitiously by the sharp bookmaker Billy Jakes, who notices a sleight of hand and makes a decision which will cost both him and Hawker dearly.
Now, The End of Devil Hawker is one of Conan Doyle's last short stories and the first to be published posthumously in 1930, but it had its roots far earlier than that, and in fact it might have been the Conan Doyle project with the longest gestation of any. Its origins appear to lie in a boxing play that Conan Doyle worked on with his brother-in-law Willie Hornung in 1894. Conan Doyle was very interested in writing for the stage around that time. He'd just had great success with The Story of Waterloo, which we covered back in episode 10. And it's said that this new boxing play, which was simply called the Waterloo play, was conceived of as a vehicle for that great actor. But in the end, the play came to nothing. It didn't get past the note stage, and Conan Doyle reused the research he'd undertaken to write his great Regency boxing epic, Rodney Stone, which came out in 1896. Now, some 10 years later, around 1907, Conan Doyle seems to have gone back to this original play idea when he came to write The House of Temperley, the play that was first performed in September 1909. And this is where the story has become a little confused in the retelling, because it's often said that The House of Temperley is an adaptation of Rodney Stone. In fact, we've said so ourselves on the podcast several times, but we've been able to have a look at the unpublished script for this episode, and House of Temperley actually has an awful lot more in common with Devil Hawker. In fact, the short story is essentially a retelling of the main plotline of House of Temperley without the boxing. House of Temperley, of course, didn't really find its audience. The play run was curtailed when Edward VII died in 1910 and the West End theatres shut in mourning. And so it's conceivable that Conan Doyle felt that the story never quite got the outing it deserved, or maybe it was just a convenient source of material for a commission late in his life. Whatever the case, Temperley did provide the basis for Devil Hawker, and Conan Doyle wrote it along with an eclectic mix of other tales in the last few months of his life. The other stories include things like The Death Voyage, a peculiar counterfactual about an alternative version of the Great War, and The Last Resource, a strange Dashiell Hammett hard-boiled crime story. And in fact, it's possible that Devil Hawker was the last story Conan Doyle worked on, as it's said that the galley proofs were on his desk the day he died, on the 7th of July, 1930. The story was first published then in the Saturday Evening Post in the USA in August 1930, and in the Strand magazine in the UK in November of the same year. Thereafter, it disappeared into obscurity for the best part of 50 years, until it was resurrected by John Michael Gibson and Richard Lancelyn Green for The Unknown Conan Doyle in 1982. But it is still remembered now and then. And in 2024, an artwork inspired by Devil Hawker was created by Megan Aldhughes for the Toronto Public Library's Conan Doyle mural project. And you can find an image of that artwork in the show notes.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting what you found out about the play there, Mark. That there has been this assumption that we've all fallen into the same trap that this is Rodney Stone,
Mm,
and it's fascinating to think that this is obviously playing on his mind in some way towards the end of his life.
mm,
It's really interesting. He goes back to this interest in the Regency with this story as one of the last stories,
mm.
and essentially I don't know whether it's because the play itself never, as he will have seen it, got the chance it deserved.
Yeah.
Partly because, as you say, because of the play being overshadowed, and also
Mm.
the other troubles with it. The ladies didn't want to go and see it because it was all about
Yes.
boxing, and it was a bit macho and a bit kind of bloody in its approach, and that sort of thing. So it's kind of it wasn't written for
Mm.
as wide an audience as perhaps he would have wanted. But obviously his interest in it remained, and the fact that he then wrote it as a short story,
Yeah.
and it's perhaps part of the reason we've kind of had all this error with the play and the connection with Rodney Stone is the fact that Devil Hawker got a very limited publication
Yes.
and disappeared and until Richard and John resurrected it for the uncollected.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's still not a very well known story. It's
No.
nice that Toronto have included it in this artwork. It certainly deserves to be better known.
Yes.
And it's a really excellent coda, really, to the whole Regency series. The fact that he it really caps it all off very nicely. And the thing that struck me rereading it is the fact that it's so well written.
Yeah. It's
It's
really well
great. It's
written.
still got the touch, quite definitely. The way it's set up, you got the lovely framing device
Yeah.
around the way where it starts with a print shop in the 1920s,
Yeah.
and then you go into the main. It's essentially a big two-act play, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Two main acts, and then we go back to the print shop for the end. And I just reading this, I thought it would have made a fantastic black and white Ealing type movie. Really,
Yes.
it would just certainly you can see all the actors. They would have had all the right actors at that time. Yeah, so it's something not a portfolio piece like Dead of Night, but you'd have all those sort of actors,
Yeah,
and
it would.
the framing device would have been done brilliantly. So it's again because it's come from a play, possibly it's got all that kind of dramatic quality and filmic quality to it.
Yes.
It's great.
Yeah, it really is. It's really, really good. And I think,
Mm.
yeah, I'd love to have seen it as a play. I think Andre Morel would have been a fantastic Devil Hawker. You need somebody like that to play it.
Mm.
I mean, let's talk a bit about the play itself because the connections are really striking. Um, the script has never been published to my knowledge, and
Mm.
it only really exists now in the Lord Chamberlain's records in the British Library, and
Mm.
that's the register of plays from the 1820s through to 1968, when it ceased to be a requirement that you submitted your
Mm.
play for copyright purposes to the Lord Chamberlain's office. Um, and we might well get into Temple in a bit more detail in a future episode. But for now, just to give a bit of background to it, the play itself concerns Sir Charles Templey, who's an inveterate gambler who squandered his family fortune at the card table, with most of the proceeds going into the pocket of this violent and ruthless Sir John Hawker. And to recover his fortune, Sir Charles bets all he has, double or quits, on a boxing match, which will be essentially his man against Sir John's. But when the big day arrives, Sir John has arranged for Sir Charles's fighter to be kidnapped, and it's only when Sir Charles is rather more honourable and noble, and certainly not the gambling type. His brother, Captain Jack Templey, who actually is on a break from the Napoleonic Wars. He's just come back. He's recuperating. When he steps into the ring, that the day is saved. In fact, Sir John is absolutely enraged, and at that point he takes his anger out on Jakes, who is the same Jakes that you mentioned in the synopsis, Paul, who had spotted that Sir John was intending to cheat Sir Charles at the card table, and so Jakes, out of revenge, then reports Sir John to Watier's. And so what you essentially have is the main plot of Temperley is fixed around this boxing match. But if you take the boxing match out, you've got Devil Hawker. So Sir John is still caught in the play. Sir John is caught by Jakes intending to swindle his opponent. The evidence against Sir John plays out the same way, the signed bill, the witnesses, etc. And I think it is interesting that, the two main scenes that Conan Doyle is riffing off here are the ones in Tom Cribb's parlor and in Watier's club. And of course, that's the name of the two parts of the story.
Mm.
But the other thing I think just to say about the play is that as much as it doesn't have a direct connection, as far as I can tell, to Rodney Stone, it's set in the Regency. You have many similar famous names of the great Corinthians of the age and the members of the fancy. Um, it actually has more in common, bizarrely, with the Croxley Master, which we covered in episode
Mm.
32, in that in this boxing match, when it's all starting to go against Sir John, he tries to arrange a crowd invasion of the ring so that the fight has to be called off. But in fact, it doesn't work, and the referee decides against Sir John's man and awards the fight to Captain Jack, and honor is preserved. Um, so it is an interesting one to see how much the play makes it into Devil Hawker, because Conan Doyle is even lifting dialogue directly. But he does make some substantial changes as well. I mean, Byron is not in the play, as we'll come on to Byron. And I think in a way the short story is more visceral. It has some particularly nasty moments in it as well. But I think you made the really critical point that it's a real showcase of Conan Doyle's talent,
Mm.
really at the end of his life, that he's able to take this stuff, make it make a really compelling short story out of something that was intended for an entirely different medium.
Mm. And it's also uh, instructive to read a story like this written right at the end of his life, and where people now as well have this tendency to write Doyle off that, oh, as a kind of spiritualist crank,
Hmm.
and that's taken over all his life.
Yeah.
And this disproves that, because it shows he still had the touch with fiction when he chose to turn his mind to it. It's the same as oh, let's write off the whole casebook of Sherlock Holmes
Yes.
without actually going back and rereading them properly.
Yeah.
It is, and I think this really does show he retained the touch right till
Yeah.
the end when he really put his mind to it. and,
Yeah.
and yeah, this story, I think it rates as one of his best short stories. I think.
Yeah, it easily
Mm,
does. Easily
mm,
does. And it's the immediacy of it. I mean, it's interesting as well. He's writing this at an age when we've had 10, 20 years of motion pictures by this
mm,
time as well. And, he always wrote in a very, visual way.
mm,
But you can almost see the tracking shots. You can almost feel
mm,
the switch between scenes and settings
mm,
in the same way as, as you're describing an Ealing production. You really do get that sense in. I do wonder if there is something happening in his writing in the 1920s where he's almost taking some of the cues and codes from film. We know he was influenced by them. We've covered the Nightmare Room in a previous
mm,
story, which
mm.
is entirely based on, it being a film production. But you really get that kind of immediacy and visual impact here as well.
And you get the feeling, if he'd lived longer or he'd been born a bit later,
Mm.
that he'd have ended up, like Hugh Walpole later did, going writing
Yes.
scenarios and living
Yeah.
out in Hollywood for a while. And I mean, we know Doyle went to Hollywood, and I think he would have taken up the opportunity to become a script writer as well,
Oh,
because of
easy.
his interest in playwriting. He would have seen, oh, here's the next stage, and I think
Yeah.
quite definitely he would have taken that step. And this sort of story really shows that he'd have been rather good at
It would
it.
have been very good. Yeah,
Mm,
that's right.
mm,
So the story opens in a very filmic way, as you were describing, Paul, with this entering a little print shop on Drury Lane. There is a slight problem, isn't there, though, with the illustration for this from the
mm.
from the 1930 version, the Saturday Post illustrator has decided to put the people in Regency
Mm,
dress, which isn't right because the
mm.
setting of this is clearly 1920s instead. But nevertheless, you enter into this print shop, and as you're perusing the prints, you come across the devilish face of one Sir John Hawker.
Mhm. The way it's written, it's great. You suddenly get the character before we've even met the character. There we, it's just this excellent setup
Yeah,
that
it
we've got
is.
the character, we meet him, and we get his character straight away from this shop, and the whole idea, it's I get always works. I think in fiction and film, you have this kind of it's almost the magical shop with these strange things, and this kind of the modern world meets the old world, which is why the illustration is is
Yeah,
so wrong, because this is meant to be set in the 1920s, and people going around looking at all these old-fashioned prints,
yeah.
but it's also telling us something about the period in which the story is set, because we're talking an age when newspapers, such as they were in the early 19th century, they could only do very limited
Mm,
illustration. It was mainly, you see the Times of that, and it's just this block of text.
mm,
And so, the way famous people would get their faces known is with these engravings and
mm,
portraits, and people would buy their heroes and frame them and put them up in their homes, or they'd be in the pubs and places like, as we're going to talk about, Tom Cribb's parlor.
mm.
As fashion goes along, you'd replace them with the latest thing, and it's just a lovely way of balancing the now and the then
Yeah,
within the story. Again, it just this ability, Doyle's ability to frame the story, place the story immediately.
yeah.
It's great, and he also manages to get in a family connection here as
He,
well.
he does, yeah. He makes
Mm.
reference to the long and wonderful series of H.B., the great
Mm.
unknown John Doyle, who in his day was a real power in the land. And that's a reference to John Doyle, his grandfather, who was born in 1797 in Dublin, trained at the Royal Dublin Society, moved to London in the 1820s with his wife Mariana Conan, who was the sister of Michael Conan, from whom Conan Doyle got the Conan in his name. And when lithography came on the scene in the 1820s, he became one of the most prolific political cartoonists of his day. He actually illustrated a cartoon once a month while Parliament was in session for 22 years. And he illustrated anonymously as HB. But if you look at the initials HB, the H is made up of two J's and the B is made up of two D's. So he's hiding his name in plain sight. And he was anonymous until 1843 when he essentially outed himself in a letter to Peel when there was a bit of a scandal around one of the illustrations. And so, but John Doyle was kind of a bit of a tragic figure in a strange kind of way. He rose to prominence. He was very um, well known. By 1840 he was able to afford a house in Hyde Park, and he moved in circles with people like Wilkie Collins and Thackeray and Macaulay and the like. Um, he was top flight, but he was never a kind of really major figure in the sense of being a real influencer. Thackeray famously said of HB, of John Doyle, that his cartoons, although clever and witty, were too genteel to raise more than a gentlemanly smile. He said, "You will never hear any laughing at HB." And certainly, John Doyle died in 1868. When they came to auction off his papers in 1882, the auction had to be abandoned because there was a lack of interest. But he's nevertheless still known as being one of the kind of primary figures in the British school of caricaturists, of whom people like John Leach or Tenniel or his son Richard Doyle, Dickie Doyle, is far better known. But here you go.
Mm.
Here's Conan Doyle trying to, tip a nod to a relative of his and maybe sort of restore their influence and connection again.
Yeah, and he seems to have uh, done a bit of this at this time, because with him arranging an exhibition of his own father's
Mm,
works as well. It was this again, looking back later in life at the family, and
mm,
it's intriguing that he just drops HB into this story, and it is almost as if People have forgotten him, and he deserves to be remembered, and
Yeah.
he's right to do so.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you've mentioned part of the reason that HB is kind of forgotten is he was so genteel.
Yes.
This wasn't a Rowlandson or the real Gilray,
No.
the really sort of vicious cartooning style of the late 18th, early 19th century, and Doyle himself behaved and held himself as a gentleman. Really,
Mm.
he was a very distinguished looking man. He was actually mistaken for the Duke of Wellington physically. And if you look at the pictures of him, you can see why. And again, because people didn't have photography, yeah, the pictures they're going off are
Off
from
engravings.
cartoonists or from engravings.
Yeah.
So there is a definite passing resemblance between John Doyle and the Duke, and Doyle himself probably found this rather
Oh,
amusing.
yes. I should think so. Yeah.
But as you said, it was his son Richard, Dickie Doyle, who really was more
Yeah.
famous and remains more famous because of these wonderful fairy pictures he did, and also his work for Punch.
Yeah.
He was one of the people who helped to found Punch.
Yeah.
And drew the original cover, which remained in use for a long time. So
Yeah.
all of
That's right.
this is then it's again. I think this is Arthur Conan Doyle. He's really looking back at this
Mm.
point and bringing all this in. And I think that this is why it's a rich concoction.
It
This
is.
story. It's a really important piece.
Yeah. And I think you're right. I think maybe we're reading too much into it. Maybe he probably knew he was very ill when he was writing this because he'd suffered on his tour in Copenhagen, I think it was in
Mm,
'29. Maybe he's thinking to legacy here. And it's not
mm,
just his own legacy, it's also the legacy of his family and
mm,
that family connection as well, because
mm,
who else is going to stand up for them once he's gone? So
mm,
I don't know, maybe that's the way we think about it. But you're right, it's a significant piece, and the fact
mm,
that he throws in a relative into so early into this story
mm,
is significant. So among these prints, we see for the first time our engraving of Devil Hawker.
mm,
It is a face which Mephistopheles might have owned.
mm,
Thin, dark, keen, with bushy brows and fierce, alert eyes, which glare out from beneath them. There is a full-length coloured print which shows him to be tall and magnificently proportioned, with broad shoulders, slim waist, clad in a tightly buttoned green coat, buckskin breeches, and high Hessian boots.
mm,
Below is the inscription Sir John Hawker, and that is the Devil
mm,
Hawker of the legends. It's great. Actually, it did put me in mind of another villain, Dr. Grimesby
mm,
Roylott from the Speckled Band, who actually has a connection back to the Regency, because when they're describing the Roylotts and how they've fallen on hard times in the Speckled Band, Conan Doyle says the family was at one time among the richest in England, and the estates extended over the borders into Berkshire in the north and Hampshire in the west. In the last century, however, which would have been the 18th century, four successive heirs were of a
mm,
dissolute and wasteful disposition, and the family ruin was eventually completed by a gambler in the days of the Regency.
mm,
So even in Sherlock Holmes stories, we're
mm,
getting little glimpses of the Regency, aren't we? So
mm,
and then we go into Tom Cribb's parlour. And Cribb we've mentioned before in previous episodes, but actually, Conan Doyle had written a story called The Lord of Falconbridge, in which Tom Cribb is a major character. That came out in 1909, so that's around the same time as he was writing House of Temple. Probably that same kind of set of inspirations leading in different directions. And certainly the Lord of Falconbridge feels like a kind of story that he couldn't crowbar into House
mm,
of Temple, or it was an idea that occurred at the same time. But Cribb was the great boxing champion of England from 1808. He was originally from Bristol. Could have been the Bristol Bustler, as we know
mm,
from the how the King held the Brigadier. But he became a amateur boxer when he moved to London, and he really became famous around 1810 when he had a fight with a chap called Tom Molyneux, who was a former slave from America. They fought in 1810 and in 1811. And really, after 1811, nobody challenged Tom Cribb for the next 11 years. So he was de facto the boxing champion of England. But when he retired in 1822, he became the landlord of the Union Arms in Panton Street, which was really close to Haymarket, so right in the centre of London. And records show that he actually bought the pub outright in 1822 for £950, which is an astonishing sum. Pierce Egan, the great sports writer and the author of Boxiana and Life in London, who's a terrific sports writer and great writer of the Regency period, he had a great line on Cribb saying that Cribb had stepped back from boxing to serve his customers in a more palatable
Mm.
style. um, but the pub bizarrely exists to this day. In fact, I was there this week. I had a quick look at it, and it is there on 36 Panton Street, which is a couple of streets over from Leicester Square. And today, the Union Arms is called the Tom Cribb. So we'll put a photograph in the show notes and the brass plaque outside, which actually makes reference to Rodney Stone as well. But Cribb's Parlour is again somewhere that we have been before because in the Lord of Falconbridge, it's described in a fair amount of detail. But Cribb's Parlour was this private room that sat behind the main bar, and I think we get a sense of Conan Doyle's sources from his description here, because in Pierce Egan's work, Life in London 1821, which I just mentioned, he goes into a bit of detail on Cribb's Parlour, and that was accompanied by an illustration by Cruikshank, which we'll put in the show notes, which shows this kind of really small space with all the boxing paintings and engravings on the wall. And this is the sort of room where they would have pushed all of the tables and chairs to one side so that the fancy might have fought off some of their excess energy in the back room of the parlour. And it's here that we meet Tom Cribb, we meet other members of the boxing fraternity, and we hear of the problems between Sir Charles and Sir John, which they are going to settle over a game of cards.
Yeah, as you say, Mark, it's really well delineated this whole setup, and you've got again something would have worked really well on film.
Mm.
You've got Miss Lucy Stagg,
Mm.
the classic barmaid
Yes.
behind is this kind of the setup there. And there's a wonderfully ambiguous description. A lady who had been accused of many things but never shyness. Yeah, read that as you want to read it.
That's great.
Again, this is what I've been saying with Doyle, still maintaining that touch with his writing. So you got Lucy, of course, getting all the chaff, and you've also got Billy Jakes trying to diddle her almost. Again,
Yes.
his character build with Billy Jake's trying to, oh,
Yes.
there's a dead cert in such and such a race, and
Sarah
it can't go
Sesker in
wrong.
the Oaks. Yeah.
Fortunately, Tom Cribb's listening. Don't you listen to him, Lucy? And so again, that's a bit of Tom Cribb character there. That he's kind of his heart's in the right place and he's
Yes.
looking out for her. Then, as you say, you got Sir John Hawke and Sir Charles Trevor there as these representatives of the get two different types really. Trevor is a man who enjoys a flutter, as it were, but
Mm.
he's not a bad sort. Whereas Hawker is, yeah, there's no redeeming this
Yeah,
man.
deserving of his name.
That's for sure. And you kind of again this whole thing when you're reading Doyle. Also, Charles Trevor. I wonder if he was related to Victor Trevor, and think, oh no, because Victor Trevor's father's an Armitage and only hiding behind the name Trevor. But
Yes,
again,
true.
it's Doyle reusing names and
Yeah.
his usual way. And you've got this as you said, real mix of which shows what the fancy was made up of real toffs, and then you've got your Billy Jakes types, the
Yeah.
bookies, and then just kind of roughs hanging
Yes.
about as well. And this is where all of society comes together, and
Mm.
we get this very very well portrayed in here. But we also have the introduction of historical
Mm.
characters, which will happen more in this story as well.
Mm.
But we have Lord Byron, as you've mentioned before, Mark. He's actually here on this night, waiting to watch the boxing, and this is supposed to be when Byron was a student. So he was a student at Cambridge between 1805 to 1807.
Mm.
So that sets when Doyle's got the story here.
Mm.
But unfortunately, as from what you've just said, Mark, there's a big historical discrepancy there. So we've got Byron as a student walking into Tom Cribb's pub, which Tom Cribb hadn't boarded until 1822, which is 2 years before Byron's death in Greece. But we overlook these things because it's mood, it's
Yeah,
atmosphere,
it
it's
is.
setting, it's painting a picture,
Mm.
which is what you really get here. And Byron is also he's an interesting crossover character, historical character for Doyle, because Doyle, you read some of his Regency, so he's got no time for the dandies,
No, he
the
hasn't.
real dandy. Doyle loathes Prince Regent.
Yeah, and Brummel.
And Brummel, he just these to him are big, they're not manly men, whereas
Mm.
the others have their faults, but if they're into boxing, they're all right.
Yes.
And Byron certainly was, but Byron studied boxing under one of the other famous pugilists of the time, gentleman John Jackson.
Mm.
Who had his own kind of establishment in London, and also there was another chap called Henry Angelo who taught fencing
Yes.
at the same establishment. And he was teaching Byron fencing. And there's a very, again, it's a brilliant character thing because Byron and Hawker have a
Mm.
bit of a verbal set too.
Yeah.
And Hawker makes a very nasty point with Byron's club foot.
Yes, it's horrible.
And it says about fencing, you need a good agile foot for fencing. And
Yeah.
it's a deliberate, he's trying to get a
It's
rise out of Byron and almost trying to get Byron to take a swing at him,
he
which
is.
which it doesn't quite happen. But it's all that wonderful atmospheric stuff,
Mm.
and
Mm.
Byron obviously did interest Doyle. I argued a few years ago. I think there's touches of Byron in Sherlock Holmes. I think
Yeah.
in the moods and so on, and then you've
The
got
Bohemian.
I do think the kind of the Reichenbach thing fits into almost Manfred
Yes.
on the Jungfrau.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah, it
that kind
does.
of great romantic element. So Byronism is something that is present in some of
Mm.
Doyle's fiction, and
Mm.
you do get the impression that he saw Byron's faults, but he
Yes.
certainly has some admiration for him.
I think you also get a real sense here that Conan Doyle would have loved to have been in Tom Cribb's parlour.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, I think what you say about the kind of the manliness, the masculinity, the kind of it's interesting. He sees boxing as a great leveler of society. You know, in your description there of the people who are here, from
Mm,
the toffs to the roughs, you know, he sees this as being one of the great strengths of boxing. It comes up as a theme in Croxley Master as well. This idea that it's going to break the class system. Of course, it's all heavily loaded with masculinity and things like that. And in fact,
mm,
when you look at the play of House of Temple, there is a rather clunky scene in the middle, which is essentially a kind of talking up masculinity and it becomes a really important plot point later down the line. But we will cover that when we do Temple
mm, mm, mm.
instead. Um, but yeah, the whole scene is fantastic, and again, it's Conan Doyle's uncanny ability to create character types in a sentence or half a sentence,
Mm,
as in the example of the barmaid that you talk about as well.
mm, mm,
I think he really does capture something of the personalities. Tom Cribb himself was famously generous. And there is that sequence, isn't there, where the guys come in for broiled bones,
yeah,
and
yes.
and essentially they're just doing what people always did in the Union Arms, which is they turned up a bit worse for wear and tried to
Mm,
have a pop at the champion of England,
mm,
and uh, and Tom Cribb, who seems to have been a bit of a gentle giant, probably Bernard Bresslaw in this
mm,
version of
mm,
in our film version, and he turned around and he would basically put them off as best he possibly could. He's actually a very appealing character, and you think,
mm.
yeah, I think Conan Doyle would have loved to have spent time in his company.
Mm. And yet you get another reflection of this with a later writer who we have mentioned before, George MacDonald Fraser, and with the Flashman books, where
Yeah.
you get the scene in Royal Flash where Bismarck takes on John Gully, who
Yes.
actually was a pugilist who became an MP,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
again showing this kind of the way the class system, there was certain strange flexibilities
Yeah.
And this nickname with John Jackson, for instance, gentleman John Jackson, where you've got this real mix of, and it is the way Fraser plays the Bismarck thing. It's the amateur wanting, though, thinking he's a hard man wanting over Poppet
Yeah.
at a great champion boxer. And he also with MacDonald Fraser, he wrote his own novel set in this period, which is the fight that you talked about between
Yeah.
Cribb and Molyneux. Black Ajax
Black Ajax. Yeah. It's a
is
great book.
Fraser's book on this very topic. So, it does it fits it. They do feel contemporary.
Yes.
These ideas and what is masculinity. And as I say, with Doyle, you can tell that he with his dislike of the dandies and this kind of what he regards as effeminacy was
Yeah.
the boxers. He, as you say, he'd love to have hung about with
Absolutely.
these people, and he yeah, he'd have felt uncomfortable with some aspects of that world, but I'm particularly when it crosses over, as we'll discuss later, into the club world,
Yeah.
and you've got
Yeah. Yeah.
the more what he would regard as some of the more effeminate, dandified people. But
Yeah.
it's wonderful, fascinating stuff.
Yeah, it is. So it's in Tom Cribb's parlour that Jakes, the bookmaker, has seen Hawker using his thumb to mark the cards that he was intending to use when playing Sir Charles for money. Sir Charles was going to, I think it was £3,000. It was quite a big
And then
bet.
it doubles up to 6,000, doesn't it,
That's right.
with this?
Yeah, so he's going to try and he
Yeah.
tries to clear his £3,000 debt by playing double and quit. So he's playing for £6,000, and Jake says, "I promise not to reveal your deep dark secret if you give me the £3,000 that you were about to swindle
Mm.
out of Sir Charles." So at which point Sir John has to write a note to Jakes, which he does on paper provided by Lucy, and that becomes a sort of critical piece of evidence as we shall see. But this is this topic of kind of card cheats is something that comes back time and time again for Conan Doyle, and perhaps the most significant story to deal with this would be a regimental scandal written in 1892, a story we haven't covered, but we've mentioned before, largely in the context of a later one, The Empty House from 1903, where, of course, the Honourable Ronald Adair is killed by Colonel Sebastian Moran when Adair is about to reveal that Moran has been cheating at cards.
The
But
dishonourable Moran.
the dishonourable Moran, yeah. But both of them are kind of riffing off perhaps this real life scandal, the Tranby Croft affair of 1890, when the future Edward VII was implicated in a card scandal. And then one of my favourite sort of throwaway references in the Sherlock Holmes stories is to the Tankerville Club
Mm.
scandal, where Major Prendergast was wrongfully accused of cheating at cards and was narrowly saved. His honour was saved by Sherlock Holmes. That's in the Five Orange Pips. So yeah, so it's something that clearly is part. I think it's part of Clubland, isn't it? It's part
Mm.
of the world that Conan Doyle was inhabiting, and he was a member of so many clubs. He will have, these scandals would have been part and parcel of life, and the implications on the reputation of the individual responsible was incredibly significant.
Mm. I think we're given a kind of hint here with Jakes that he spotted this from the corner of his eye,
Mm.
knew something was going on. But I think we're given the hint that Jakes has played these games himself in the past, that he's as well as being a bookie, he's a professional card sharper and knows exactly what's going on and how to play the game.
Well, he's poacher turned gatekeeper,
Mm,
definitely. He
mm,
knows
mm,
all these tricks as well.
mm,
But poor old Jakes is going to get his comeuppance, isn't he? Because
mm.
in this story, in the play, the boxing match goes wrong for Sir John, and he takes out his frustrations on Jakes, but you don't see it. It's reported. It's off screen. In the short story, you get it described, and it's
Mm.
pretty horrible. John Hawker says to Jakes, "It was not wise, Billy Jakes, to trust yourself alone upon a country road with one of the most dangerous men in England. For once your cupidity has been greater than your shrewdness." A quick glance of those deadly dark eyes to right and to left, and then the heavy hunting crop came down with a crash upon the bookmaker's head. With a cry, he dropped from the cob, and he had hardly reached the ground before the devil had sprung from the saddle and with his left arm through the bridle rein to hold down his plunging horse, he was rapidly running his right hand through the pockets of the prostrate man. With a bitter curse, he realized that, however imprudent Jakes had been, he had not been such a fool as to carry his papers about with him. Hawker rose, looked down at his half-conscious enemy, and then slowly drew his spur across his face. I mean, it's particularly unpleasant, it has to be said. And it ends with Devil Hawker riding off laughing maniacally over his villainy. Hawker looked down at his bloody spur and felt well content with his morning's work. I mean, it's really horrible, but and melodramatic, but
Yes,
great.
yeah, proper stage villainy. I mean, two things struck me reading this. This is one. I'm surprised Hawker doesn't finish him off
Yeah.
because he's just setting up trouble for himself in the future. Or surprised that he didn't employ some other bully boys
Mm.
to do his dirty work for him. And the other thing is when he's trying to find the paper, it just struck me as kind of similar to Charles Augustus Milverton, but then it's Holmes and Watson
Oh, yes.
doing the threatening.
Yes.
And again, Milverton, I wouldn't be so stupid as to carry these things with
Run
me.
by pocket. That's right.
Mm.
Yeah. No, that's true. And it's the attack on Jakes that then sets up the second part of the story, the second part, which takes place in Watier's club, which is ultimately Sir John getting his comeuppance.
I say, well, Watier's club is one of the it didn't last long.
No,
Um,
but it
uh,
ruined enough people in a
oh,
short time.
absolutely, yes. It cost a lot to a number of people, but it was kind of one of the renowned clubs of the Regency period, essentially a gambling den, but
Mm.
an up, a top end establishment. I mean, it was really there were three big clubs at this time. You got White's,
Yeah.
Brooks's, and Watier's. White's was top of the tree. White's was it was a real Tory establishment place.
Mm. Mm.
All the guards officers went to
Mm.
White's, and it was that was the one to be in. But Watier's it had a name as well. It's founded in 1807.
Yeah.
Yeah, 1807 by a maitre d' of George or the Prince Regent's
Mm.
establishment, the future George IV. Supposedly because the food at clubs was so complained about that this Wattier was supposed to be a great chef, and so Wattiers was set up to have a reputation for food, but its reputation for gambling is the one that has survived. And
Mm.
as you said, Mark, it ruined a number of reputations, and there's a great sense of the place. If you read Ralph Neville, who in the
Mhm.
years between the wars wrote these wonderful, chatty books
Yeah.
about social history. They're anything but academic, but they're hugely
They're great fun
enjoyable
though.
and really well written.
Yeah.
And he really knows his stuff. With the backgrounds, and he describes what is in these words. Somewhere about 100 years ago, there was much gambling at Wattier's Club, 81 Piccadilly. Here, Macao, a game said to have been introduced by French émigrés, was a good deal played. The life of Wattier's was a short and merry one, for it only lasted some 12 years, being closed in 1819, when for a time it became a sort of common gambling house. Byron, Beau Brummel, and many other men of fashion frequented the club, and occasionally, says tradition, solaced themselves for their losses by throwing bottles of wine out of the window into the yard of the house just across the way. So that's Ralph Neville's description of what it is, written in 1922. But we have a more contemporary account
Mm.
by Lord Byron himself in his journals. And he says, I liked the dandies. They were always very civil to me, though in general they disliked literary people. I knew them all more or less, and they made me a member of Watier's, a superb club at that time, being, I take it, the only literary man, except two others, both men of the world, in it. The other two men he mentions there are Thomas More and William Robert Spencer, who wrote
Oh,
Society Verse. And
ah,
Tom More was, the author of Lalla Rookh
hmm,
and very much a man about town, as well as
yeah,
a genuinely high poet of repute. So that again gives that feeling they didn't like literary men particularly.
yes,
So it's men of the turf, men of the ring,
yeah,
and military men, and
men of
it's that.
action,
Yes, it's Doyle's world again.
yeah,
And again, that Byron himself showing how he stood as a crossover figure
yeah,
between the world of
absolutely,
the dandies, the literary world, and this very masculine
yeah,
world. So it's again we're getting a really interesting perspective on that whole social scene here.
hmm,
It's classic Regency stuff,
yeah,
and you can see the appeal to Doyle of all this. And again, I, I think he'd have enjoyed Tom Cribb's place more, but I think these
oh,
places
he
have a
would have,
certain appeal as well.
yeah,
Um,
Toff's behaving badly,
Yes, absolutely. But there's also, because it's a place that establishment figures go to, there is a certain decorum about it, and this
hmm,
is what is shown to be important in the story
hmm,
as it continues. This is a club which has rules.
hmm. John Hawker is brought before the committee at
Mm,
what he is to account for his behaviour in the allegation that they've now had raised to them by Jakes, the bookmaker. And so we then introduced to a whole series of characters who've
mm.
got very interesting names, haven't they? They've got very interesting backgrounds. But this is a mixture of fictional characters and real life characters.
Yeah, so we do have this mix of the real and the fictional. And well, the most senior figure here seems to be the Duke of Bridgewater, who is described as a splendid rubicund old gentleman, grey-haired but virile, leaning heavily upon an amber cane. He's going to be the really important figure
Mm.
as this goes on. There's another individual who unfortunately is absent. Lord Foley,
Yes.
who's off racing.
Yes.
And one feels this is Doyle having this is a family thing again, and Doyle having fun because his mother was a Foley, and you think this is a bit of fun on his part. There's another fictional one here, Colonel Dacre,
Mm.
but D apostrophe A. But do you wonder, is this the same Dacre who features in the Brigadier in England,
Yeah, indeed.
just spelt differently? And another figure from that world, Lord Rufton.
Yes.
Lord Rufton, a big bluff county magnate, who is presumably the same character who looks after Gerard
Yeah.
when he's kind of on parole in
That's right.
England.
Yeah.
And I just wonder if this is Doyle playing on names as well. Rufton. There was one of the characters who. The men about town who was part of this whole Regency scene here was Lord Sefton. And
Yeah.
I just wonder if Doyle's kind of just reworked that as Rufton. And
Rufton
you
Sefton.
know a bit about Sefton, Michael.
Well, yeah, that's yeah. So
Mm,
Sefton is a name in the northwest of England. So,
mm,
but the Earl of Sefton had his base at Croxteth Hall, just
mm,
just outside Liverpool as well. And in fact, Aintree has a
mm,
has a race called the Lord Sefton Fancy.
mm. If this is the same Lord Rufton though, from his seat is most definitely down in Dorset, isn't it?
It's
If
Dawn,
it's
yeah, he's down there. He's
yeah.
down there. And Lady Frances Carfax is meant to be
Oh, of
related
course,
to the
yes.
to the Earl of Rufton, isn't it? She's
Mm.
descended.
I think they've fallen on hard times by that. It's probably this Lord Rufton's gambled everything away.
That's right. Yeah,
Mm.
that's right.
There's another factual character, a historical character, General Scott is
Mm.
mentioned, and he's described. He was General Scott, who was said to live on toast and water and
Mhm.
win 10,000 a year from his less sober companions. Now this is Doyle reworking what was definitely one of his sources for his Regency and Napoleonic stories, and which I'd recommend anybody who wants to know about this period to go to the Reminiscences and Recollections of Captain Gronow,
Oh yeah,
who was a
certainly.
guards officer and man about town. And he says of this individual, General Scott was known to have won at White's £200,000 thanks to his notorious sobriety and knowledge of the game of whist. The general possessed a great advantage over his companions by avoiding those indulgences at the table which used to muddle other men's brains. He confined himself to dining off something like a boiled chicken with toast and water. By such a regimen, he came to the whist table with a clear head, and possessing as he did a remarkable memory, with great coolness and judgment, he was able honestly to win the enormous sum of £20,000.
Whoa.
So it's one in one go, not £10,000 a year, but
Wow.
this is
He
this
must have
is
been absolutely infuriating.
yes.
No wonder Hawk has a go at him. Toast and water, man. Yeah. Gosh.
So I have other names that I mentioned there. Points is one
Yeah.
who comes to now. Points. I think this is probably the well-connected Whig MP William Stephen Points, who was the MP for St Albans. So he
Hmm.
definitely he would have been more a figure for what he is because being a Whig, he wouldn't have been welcome at White's, which is a said was a
Yes.
real Tory establishment. But he was at the time we got the Whigs themselves in a split between supporters of Grenville and Pitt,
Hmm.
and Points was a supporter of Grenville, and actually voted against the Peace of Amiens, which we've
Really?
discussed before in
Foreign Office Romance.
Foreign Office Romance. Yes, thank you
Yeah.
very much.
Points is also it's an unusual spelling, isn't it? Poyntz.
Yeah.
And that's the name in the same spelling of a fellow cricketer of Conan Doyle. He was
Mm.
in the MCC. You wonder if there's a bit of a nod to a friend in there as well.
Oh yeah, it could have this double meaning thing that's fun too, Doyle, and
Mm.
and two of the names actually in who mentioned in this story are both also names that were big in the period of the English Civil War, which this the
Yeah.
the sort of period that Doyle set Micah Clarke in. So
Yes.
there was a General Sydenham Points. Who fought for the parliamentarians in the Civil War, and of course, Lord Byron's ancestor, Lord John Byron, fought for the Royalists.
Yeah.
So again, there's those names there. Another name that comes up is Vandeleur.
Hmm.
And I'm presuming this is Colonel Sir John Ormsby Vandeleur, who served in India between 1803 and 1805. So maybe this story is set
Maybe a bit
1806
later.
to 7, but we now have the problem with with the
With the
Union
Union
Arms,
Arms.
so
Yeah.
Lord knows. And he later served in the Peninsula and commanded a cavalry brigade at the Battle of Waterloo.
Hmm.
So he's somebody who
Hmm.
Doyle will certainly be familiar with, and Doyle later borrowed the name for one of Stapleton's aliases in The Hound of
Yeah.
the Baskervilles as
Yeah.
well. So yeah, it's an interesting mix going on there, and Doyle adroitly mixing fictional characters with historical characters and giving this real air of verisimilitude to the whole thing.
Yeah. And then we get into this whole final sequence, which is where essentially Sir John's reputation is to be destroyed because of
Mhm.
all the evidence that's going to be brought before him. And Conan Doyle does a nice bit of sort of reverse detective work here, doesn't
Mm,
he? Where
mm,
he lays out the various pieces of evidence, which include the bar bill that was used for the promissory note
mm,
from Sir John to Jakes is identified by Lucy.
mm. And with that, it's a fact it's a wine stain
Yeah, it is a
that
wine
gives
stain.
it away. So again, we're almost getting elements of the Abbey Grange and the second stain
Yeah, we are.
coming into this, but it's a really it's a clever use of where Hawker knows that he's
Yeah.
cornered.
Yeah, it's great actually
Mm.
because all of the evidence that's going to entrap him has been laid out before. There's nothing,
Mm.
you don't get cheated as a reader. In the tradition of sort of fair game detective stories, you've
Mm.
actually got all the evidence has been laid out for you, and he
Mm.
does in fact come across. And there's a wonderful moment, isn't there, where they order the book, the membership book to come, and then the committee chairman strikes
Yes.
through the name and then says, basically, get out.
Mm.
You're not welcome here. And then you get his rather pathetic sight,
Mm.
which is he is going to be ruined, which then inevitably turns to his violent response to everybody else in the room, including the toast and water man. But it makes for a fantastic ending. But we know things did not go well for Devil Hawker.
Mm. Yeah, again a classic Regency story of descent, ending in self-destruction,
Mm,
literally, because everywhere is closed to him. I mean, once he's closed from what he is, Brookses, Whites, they'll all turn their back on him, and even he wouldn't be able to show his face in Tom Cribb's plays even.
mm. That's right.
Mm,
But there are some peculiar inconsistencies
mm,
in this final sequence, and indeed in this whole story. And I came across an article by Samuel E. Bassett, who was the professor of Greek at the University of Vermont, an expert on Homer, who wrote an article called "Homer and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle" in the Classical Weekly, 17th of November, 1930. So he just read the
mm,
story in the preceding months, and he basically talks about how there are a number of inconsistencies in the story. So Colonel Dacre is named as a member of a committee, but later when the vote comes, there's a Colonel Tufton, and we've also talked about a Ruffton being in there
mm,
as well. Hawker's note when he writes it out is in consideration of your silence, but when it's presented before the committee, it's in consideration of services rendered. And Devil Hawker, perhaps the most egregious one, Devil Hawker refers to White's Club on Charles
mm,
Street, as you'd mentioned, rather than
mm,
Watier's. So,
mm,
there's a lot of kind of internal inconsistency in it. And it's not the case that this is on account of Conan Doyle reusing the script of House of Templey and um, not quite getting the details right. It's not quite as simple as that. But it is the fact that Conan Doyle is just not that concerned with the details.
mm,
And Bassett's point is that this is entirely forgivable. He makes the point that the story was published posthumously. It was probably never revised by Conan Doyle, but then goes on to show that the errors in it show that a good storyteller, and likewise a reader who reads for the sake of the story and nothing more, regards such things as names of minor characters and details of various kinds as of secondary
mm,
importance. And in fact, he's really using this because he's mounting a defense of Homer for internal inconsistencies in the Iliad, and says, the creative poet has more important work on hand than to test the consistency of his narrative in all minor and unessential details. He must be an impressionist in thinking only of the effect of his tale at the moment. And so he ends by arguing that for studying Homer, you need to look
mm,
at the Iliad and the Odyssey from the telescope and not from the microscope. But I think it's an important point. It's an interesting one for
mm,
all the reasons that we started this podcast with, which is that this is all about the feel of the story and the pace of the story, and it's not really the internal inconsistencies or the details that matter when it comes to this story. I mean, Bassett would have absolutely hated Sherlockians.
Oh yeah, I was just going to suggest, yeah, yes, if Doyle had been more careful, where would the Sherlockian game be?
Exactly, we'd be nowhere, nowhere. So
But
yes,
it does raise the question as well. I mean, with the manuscripts that we've got of Doyle, the fact that he earlier in this particular podcast mentioned Hugh Walpole,
mm,
and Walpole was a very fluent writer,
mm,
seldom corrected, and Doyle seems to be the same.
yeah,
The pen danced across the paper almost.
yeah, yeah,
And we get that with Doyle. It just, I suspect, just poured out of him onto the page, and then he's reliant upon other people
yeah.
to pick up inconsistencies. And obviously the publishers and proofreaders, if you want to blame, there is much to blame, if not more, than Doyle himself. And I don't know how Doyle was with proofs. I mean, I think you pointed out that this particular story, the galley proofs were on his
On
desk
his
at
desk,
the time of
yeah,
his death, but I don't know how careful a proofreader Doyle was. And he was again one of these writers who he's on to the next project pretty quickly as well. So he's reliant upon the publisher and their team to hopefully try and catch as much of this as they can. And inevitably, stuff will get through. And
yeah,
if you're looking at a story like this and you've got a great glaring inconsistency like the one we picked out between Byron and Tom Cribb's purchase of the pub, the minor things really it isn't it,
doesn't
it's the
matter
story is central, and it
exactly.
is a very good story, brilliantly told,
Yeah,
and it keeps you with it.
yeah.
And that is the important. He's writing historical fiction, but he isn't writing history.
No, he's not.
And I think it's an important point to make.
Yeah.
You would pick him up on this if he'd claimed to be that I'm writing narrative history, but
But he's not.
that's not what's going on here.
No, not at all. Not at all. I
Mm.
agree entirely. And I'm fully behind Samuel E. Bassett and his interpretation of this. And if he wants to make a comparison between Arthur Conan Doyle and Homer, then who are we to disagree?
Mm.
So that brings us to the end of Devil
Mm.
Hawker. If you want to find out more, you can read the show notes at doingsofdoyle.com and find out there as well how to become a patron of the podcast. What are we looking at next month, Paul?
Next month, it's another one of our interview shows, and we'll be talking to Nick Lane, who is the writer with the Black Eye Theatre Company. And the current play that he's written is Sherlock Holmes: The Hunt for Moriarty, which is an original piece based on a number of Doyle stories. And Nick has previously adapted for the same company The Sign of Four and The Valley of Fear. So we'll have a chat about the plays and probably a general chat about matters Sherlockian with Nick. So we're looking forward to that one.
Yeah, that will be great. So until then, it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
Goodbye. A quick glance of those deadly dark eyes to right and to left, and then the heavy hunting crop came down with a crash upon the bootmakers. Bootmakers?
Yeah, you're right. We're in Toronto this
There we
time.
go. There we go.
Get out of my pub! With pleasure.